The universe has changed and the tectonic plates have shifted. The more you love and the more intimacy and closeness you have with a person, the more it's gonna hurt. But I'll take the pain.
Nicole Kidman once lost everything, forfeiting custody of her first two children to Tom Cruise. 20 years on, she has emerged as a ruthless force at the divorce negotiating table to ensure history never repeats itself. When the divorce papers with Keith Urban were finalized, she walked away with 306 days of child custody, tossing a mere 59 days to her husband of 19 years. The man who once brought flowers to her doorstep at 5:00 a.m. was left empty-handed. Why would the woman who once pulled Keith back from the depths of addiction ultimately become the one who gave him so little time? The answer did not begin in the divorce room. It began long before that, in the years that shaped Nicole's deepest fears. To understand the coldness people see today, we have to go back to where her first wounds were planted. 4 months without daring to dial. They met in January 2005 at the G-Day USA Gala in Los Angeles, a diplomatic event for the Australian expat community. Both were Australian, both were incredibly famous. Nicole felt the attraction almost straight away. She would later admit that she fancied Keith that very night. Keith, however, didn't ring her. Someone had given him her telephone number, and he held on to that slip of paper for 4 whole months without dialing a single digit. His reasoning was brutally honest. He stated he wasn't in a healthy headspace, and he simply didn't believe Nicole would see anything in him. This wasn't false modesty. Keith Urban had been living with addiction since the early days of his career. He grew up in a family with an alcoholic father, first in New Zealand, then in Australia. In 1998, he entered a cocaine rehabilitation clinic in Nashville. Following that, he got clean, built his career, won a Grammy, and became one of the most respected guitarists in country music. Yet, the addiction didn't vanish as his career soared. It merely lay dormant. It waited. And throughout those 4 months of holding on to her number, Keith carried that shadow with him. Eventually, he did make the call. Then, on Nicole's 38th birthday, he appeared outside her New York apartment at 5 a.m. with a bouquet of gardenias in his hands. Nicole later said that the moment was not just a brief rush of emotion. It was the moment she realized he was the man she hoped to marry. But to understand why a woman would dare to utter such a phrase quite so quickly, one must understand what she had previously endured. The woman who learned to trust again. Before Keith, Nicole had navigated a marriage that ended in wreckage. She married Tom Cruise in 1990, and they parted ways in 2001. In that split, what she lost wasn't merely a partner. Over time, she gradually lost the daily closeness with her 2 adopted children, Isabella and Connor, both of whom subsequently chose to live with their father. For years, the press has pointed to the influence of the Church of Scientology in that estrangement. Nicole rarely speaks openly about the matter, but on the rare occasions she does, it reveals an unhealed wound. She once said she would do absolutely anything to maintain a relationship with her children. Anything. It was a lesson she paid a heavy price to learn, a lesson that would return to haunt her nearly 20 years later. So, when she opened her door to find Keith standing there with flowers at 5 a.m., she wasn't just falling in love. She was making the conscious decision to trust once more, having already known exactly what it felt like to lose everything. They became engaged in May 2006 and married just a month later in Manly, Australia. Russell Crowe was there, Naomi Watts was there, Hugh Jackman was there. It was the wedding of 2 people who had suffered enough trauma to truly cherish what they had just found. But a mere 4 months after their wedding day, the shadow Keith had carried his entire life returned. The flight from Rome. At the time, Nicole was in Europe, right in the middle of a film shoot, an entire ocean away from home. The phone call she received was any wife's worst nightmare. The man she had just married, the man to whom she had just entrusted her most vulnerable self, had relapsed. The dormant shadow from the first chapter had now flared up into a full-blown crisis. Nicole's response spoke volumes about who she was in this marriage. She didn't ring a solicitor. She didn't call her publicist. She boarded a flight from Rome, flew straight home, staged an intervention, and checked her husband into rehab. Having been married for just 4 months, she was already fighting to keep him alive. Keith later recounted that 4 months after their wedding, the addiction he had never truly dealt with blew their marriage to pieces. As for Nicole, when speaking to Vanity Fair in 2007, she didn't sugarcoat it. She said she was willing to walk that path with him, but admitted it was an incredibly painful time, a truly dreadful place they both had to navigate. These were not the words of a woman trying to romanticize a story. They were the words of someone who had been on the verge of leaving, yet chose to stay. Keith got clean. He maintained his sobriety. He even wrote a song for Nicole entitled "Thank You," in which he credited her with saving his life. Over a decade later, when everything had crumbled, that song still remained as a musical testament to a love that is no longer there. For the better part of the next 2 decades, they became the poster couple people looked to as proof that second chances genuinely do exist. 2 decades of a fairy tale. On the red carpet, they held hands like true romantics. In interviews, Keith's voice would often break simply when trying to articulate what Nicole meant to him. He wasn't acting. People could see it was genuine. They built a family. Their first daughter, Sunday Rose, was born in July 2008. Their second daughter, Faith Margaret, arrived via a surrogate in December 2011. 2 individuals who had been broken by their pasts had somehow found each other and built something worth protecting. The pinnacle of that gratitude came in 2024, when Nicole received the American Film Institute's Life Achievement Award. Keith stood up to speak about his wife. He brought up how, 4 months after their wedding, he had spent 3 months in rehab. And he stated that it was Nicole who pulled him out of there. In front of the crowd, he publicly declared that she had saved his life. That bond wasn't just visible on grand stages. It manifested in incredibly mundane things. Ahead of a Met Gala, when asked how she managed the stress, Nicole said she just needed her husband by her side. That passing comment illustrated just how heavily she lent on him, in a very human way. But somewhere beneath the surface, something was quietly shifting. And looking back, the signs were actually everywhere. The cracks no one noticed. In September 2024, Keith appeared on an Australian radio program. The presenter asked if he believed in fate when discussing his romance with Nicole. Keith simply replied with 2 words, "Don't know." He then took off his jacket, looking visibly uncomfortable, and added, "Who knows? Let's move on." This wasn't an isolated incident. Earlier in 2024, during another interview, he seemingly hung up the phone when questioned about Nicole's steamy scenes in a film. By July, on Ryan Seacrest's show, when the host brought up his 19-year marriage, Keith merely gave a curt grunt, letting the conversation fall into an awkward silence. At the time, no one took notice. Those clips only became a major talking point after the split was announced in September 2025. Millions then watched them back and echoed the exact same sentiment. He already knew. Whatever was happening behind closed doors, Keith seemed to have emotionally checked out months before anyone else realized. What makes this even more baffling is a completely contrasting image. In June 2025, the pair were still seen together in Nashville, sitting side by side watching a FIFA Club World Cup football match. Just weeks later, news of their separation began to spread. Between the image of the couple sitting together in the stands and the news of their separation, there is a glaring void. And it is within that very void that the true story unfolded. She filed the papers, but he was the one who left. On the 29th of September 2025, TMZ was the first to break the news. Keith and Nicole had split. According to sources, they had been living apart since the beginning of that summer. The following day, the 30th of September, Nicole officially filed for divorce in Nashville, where their family had resided since 2007. The reason cited was irreconcilable differences, and she listed the date of filing as the official date of separation. There is one particularly striking detail in the filings. The entire child custody agreement had been signed and sealed on the very day she submitted the papers. That speaks not of financial wrangling or cold calculation. it points to a simpler, far more melancholic truth. This marriage had been emotionally dead for quite some time. The petition was merely the final administrative hurdle to formalize a parting of ways that had already taken place within both of their hearts. Multiple sources indicate Nicole wasn't the one who wanted the divorce. For months, she had tried desperately to salvage the marriage, mirroring the exact way she had held it together when Keith relapsed just after their wedding. But this time was different. This time, there was nothing to intervene in. Keith hadn't relapsed. He had simply checked out, in every sense that truly mattered. She may have been the one to put pen to paper, but he was the one who had walked away. And the question still hangs in the air. What genuinely transpired between June, when they were sat side by side in the stands, and September, when it all came crashing down? That remains the unexplained void. However, the moment the legal proceedings commenced, another battle ensued, and to understand it, we must revisit Nicole's harshest lesson, the fear of history repeating itself. 2 decades prior, upon her split from Tom Cruise, Nicole believed she would maintain a close relationship with her children. That didn't happen. She watched that closeness drift away, piece by piece, until there was barely anything left. Thus, when the divorce proceedings with Keith began, and he reportedly requested a 50-50th custody split, an old terror reared its head. This wasn't born of vindictiveness, it was a matter of sheer survival. She had lived through the slow, agonizing loss of 2 children in a previous divorce. She had absolutely no intention of letting history repeat itself with Sunday Rose and Faith. Nicole fought back fiercely, and according to numerous insiders, it was ultimately Keith who backed down. The reasoning lay in the reality of their respective lives. Keith's touring schedule is relentless here today, gone tomorrow, bouncing from backstage at one gig to the next life on the road. Nicole's life is entirely different. When she isn't on a film set, she is at home. When she is working, she can bring her children to the set. On paper, he had no viable argument for a 50-50th split. He knew he couldn't win in a courtroom, so he conceded. The resulting figure was 59. 59 days a year. For the remaining 306 days, the 2 daughters will reside with their mother. Caught in the middle of this adult warfare are 2 teenage girls, aged 17 and 14. This is a generation that has grown up inside what was widely regarded as the picture-perfect family, now forced to learn how to navigate life as it unravels. This narrative, at its core, belongs to them just as much as it does to their parents. Yet, there remains one detail in the divorce filings that has the whole world talking a detail concerning money, and the very shadow that has dogged Keith his entire life, the $11.40 million clause. As the divorce was finalized, the documents revealed that neither party would receive spousal support. The assets were divided almost evenly. On the surface, it appeared to be a perfectly equitable split, but for years, murmurs had circulated that their prenuptial agreement contained a rather unique stipulation, what the tabloid press dubbed the cocaine clause. According to this rumor, if Keith maintained his sobriety throughout the marriage, he would receive $600,000 for every year they remained together. 19 years of sobriety equates to roughly $11.4 million. Some sources have suggested even higher figures. To be absolutely clear, neither Keith nor Nicole has ever publicly confirmed or denied this clause. It remains firmly in the realm of speculation. But, if it is indeed true, it marks the 3rd time the specter of addiction has re-entered their story, this time taking on an entirely different form. In the first chapter, addiction was a dormant ghost lying in wait. On the flight from Rome, it was an existential threat that nearly killed the marriage before it had even begun. Here, in the pages of a legal agreement, it had become a clause, a monetary figure, a framework tying financial reward to a man's sobriety. And this is where the most polarizing question emerges. Is building a financial safety net around a husband's sobriety, year after year, the ultimate expression of unconditional love, or is it a sophisticated form of control? The answer largely depends on your vantage point. But whatever you choose to call it, one thing is undeniable. For nearly 2 decades, Nicole never stopped trying to protect Keith from himself. Now, she is no longer there to do it. And what happened next illustrates exactly what that absence means. Alone in Nashville. On New Year's Eve of that year, Nicole posted a photograph. She was in Sydney with her 2 daughters, looking out over the water, the caption gazing forward towards 2026. Keith was conspicuously absent from the frame. He wasn't in Sydney. He was in Nashville, alone. To grasp the sheer weight of that empty chair, one must remember that for 19 years, Nicole was the person keeping Keith's life upright. She was the one who organized the intervention. She was the one who flew back from Rome. She was the anchor he relied upon through every season. Once she departed, every pillar he had ever leant on began to wobble. In February 2026, rumors surfaced linking Nicole to Paul Salem, a billionaire and chairman of MGM Resorts. Close sources stressed that there was no romance, stating the pair had only crossed paths a handful of times in crowded social settings. For Keith, however, even a whisper was enough. According to one insider, he found the idea of Nicole being attached to another man difficult to stomach, not because he thought she lacked the right, but because it made the ending viscerally real in a way the divorce papers never could. Then, on the 22nd of February 2026, Gary Borman, the manager who had stood by Keith for 25 years, announced his retirement and closed down the firm that had represented him. This wasn't merely professional news. It was the final pillar crumbling away at the exact moment he was most isolated. In a matter of weeks, his life partner, his daily family life, and his longest-standing career confidant had vanished one by one. And it was during these exact weeks that a recorded clip revealed precisely where Keith was in his own mind. The man crying over a small gift. On the 2nd of January 2026, 4 days before the divorce was legally finalized, Keith sat down to record a podcast with producer Don Huff. For nearly 2 hours, he talked about guitars. He talked about artificial intelligence. He discussed poetry, gigs, and the art of live performance. He talked about absolutely everything except what was truly unraveling in his personal life. Then, midway through the session, a tour mate presented him with a surprise birthday gift, and Keith broke down in tears. Wiping his eyes, he admitted he had never experienced anything quite like it. He wasn't weeping over the gift itself. He was crying over an unexpected gesture of kindness amidst the darkest chapter of his life. Anyone who has ever experienced profound loss knows that exact feeling. You can brace yourself and stand firm through the massive, life-altering moments. It is the small, unanticipated tendernesses that utterly break you. Which leads us to the question so many are now asking. Who is truly to blame? In the comment sections of every video about this story, people keep asking the same question. Who is to blame? But maybe blame is too simple. This marriage did not have one villain and one victim. It was a love story carrying too much weight from the very beginning. For 19 years, Keith Urban publicly thanked Nicole Kidman for saving his life. But gratitude can become complicated. When one person becomes the savior and the other becomes the one who was saved, equality is hard to protect. At some point, Keith may have wanted to be seen as his own man, not just as the husband Nicole rescued. Nicole, on the other hand, stood by him for 2 decades. But she had already known deep loss after her first marriage. So when her family began to fall apart again, she did not simply watch it happen. She fought, not to punish Keith, but to protect what she still had. Maybe the hardest lesson she learned was this: you cannot save someone who no longer wants to be saved. Now Nicole is in Sydney, stepping into a new chapter, while Keith remains in Nashville, facing the silence left behind. That number, 59 days, is more than a custody arrangement. It is the final boundary between 2 people who could no longer walk the same road. So maybe the real question is not who was wrong. It is this: when love turns into a rescue mission, do you keep trying to save the person you love? Or do you save yourself before everything burns down?